Now starting the August 3rd, 2023 Mount Pleasant Planning Commission meeting. Ms. Povadico, will you take roll?
Devaney, Frederick, Havels. The three of them are absent. Honig,
Here.
Irwin,
Here.
Kingsworthy,
Here.
Leash,
Here.
Nicholas,
Here.
Bartman, absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
Move to approve. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is approval of the July 6, 2023 regular meeting minutes. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I move to approve the minutes from the June 1st, 2023 meeting. July 6th, 2023 meeting, excuse me.
Did someone second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is approval of the July 6, 2023 work session minutes.
Move to approve. I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is zoning board of appeals report, but Commissioner Friedrich isn't here, so
I can confirm that there was no meeting on July.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is communications. Have there been any communications?
There were no communications received.
Thank you. And next item on the agenda is SUP 2312.
All right, so we have only one case for tonight. The property is located at 603 North Washington Street. It's in CD4 district, General Urban Character District. The future land use is mixed use low, and the request is for a special use permit for a short-term rental. The current use is a single family. The applicant is Mark and Holly Knudsen, and the property owner is Amanda Palmer. It's a small site, 0.2 acres. So this is the location of the site today. As you can see, it's right across from the park, or its backyard faces the park. There's a big topographic change, so when you're standing at the rear property line, you're looking down onto the river. It's pretty nice. The north side of the site is a vacant parcel. It's also zoned as CD4. In fact, all lots, adjacent properties are zoned CD4 with the mixed-use low designation in the future land use map in the master plan, except for the park, as I mentioned. And I just wanted to note that the request from Mark and Holly is on a 1,008 square foot homestead house. The house used to be a rental until 2017, and now, and then it became homestead, and now the applicant will be applying for the regular rental license and the short-term rental approval by the Planning Commission. So the applicant has purchased the property as an investment, and they plan to rent the house as an Airbnb. They're proposing to rent the space to no more than 2 unrelated occupants, which is the zoning requirement for a single-family building designation. And the applicant foresees doing internal renovations, mostly cosmetic work, just so the house looks, nice as regular all Airbnbs do. And obviously all improvements that are required by the fire department after the rental license inspection. But I will say that the fire department already went in the property and did a preliminary assessment, but they will be completing that review in the process after we get the approval. They're not proposing any site alterations, facade renovations, or increase in the current maximum occupancy. So this is the current view from the property. It's a single-story house. This is the view from North Washington Street, looking northwest. And then the view from the back side of the property, from the vacant lot. looking southwest. And regarding the general standards for the special use approval, I would say that the written response that the applicant has provided, as well as my review, did not see any potential nuisance on the property or any conflicts that could happen because of the vacancy around the parcel. It's a pretty quiet area. And I think the neighborhood is also mostly characterized by rental housing. I did look at the GS to do that analysis. And its close proximity to downtown will be able to bring more customers to the city's local businesses. Proximity to Ginkgo tree would also allow the short-term rental being proposed here tonight to function as an overflow option for the customers that come to the city, especially to attend events organized by them. So the applicant did state that they would be talking with Ginkgo tree and see if they can work together on this effort. And the proposed use did not seem that it would generate adverse impacts on surrounding property, since the adjacent sites are vacant and we have the park in the back. And the applicant foresees guests utilizing the back of the property for social activities. But again, it faces the park and the river, and it's also pretty high. The lot offers enough parking options. It has a concrete pad that can accommodate 3 cars. And the one thing to note about parking is that that end of the street, it's a street without, it doesn't continue, right? It's a dead end. And it looks like that dead end is a parking area, but it's not. It's the end of the street. So the applicant was very thoughtful and asked us to discuss in the traffic committee meeting internally at City Hall if we could post a sign at that end saying that you cannot park there. And we discussed that matter and agreed with posting the sign. So the streets department will be doing that in the next couple weeks. Regarding the special use conditions, the only condition here that is relevant for this proposal is the first one regarding the fire department inspection and securing a regular rental license, which is required for long-term and short-term rentals. So that will be a condition of approval. And then because of the scope of work, the next section here is not applicable. However, they may come in the future to potentially do a deck/patio in the back, which will reopen the case, and I'll have to bring it back to you for approval when that happens. But so far, they're not proposing that work. So with that, my recommendation is to approve SUP-23-12, subject to the following condition. The applicant shall comply with the requirements of public safety and get approval for a rental license with the Mount Pleasant Fire Department. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
I have just a quick one. It says here that, let's see here, that the property owner is Amanda Palmer, but it's been purchased by Mark and Holly Knudsen. So who owns property?
So right now, the property already got transferred to Mark and Holly Knudsen. But when the staff report was being written,
Okay,
the knowledge that I had was that Amanda Palmer was the owner at that time.
so that property is closed and they are the owners.
Yes, they are the owners currently.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that.
Any other questions for staff? If the applicant would like to come up?
Good evening. My name is Holly. This is my husband, Mark, and thank you for having us here tonight. We became interested in short-term rentals partly because of all of our travels. I'm from this area. I was born and raised in Mount Pleasant, and then I moved to San Diego after high school, and I met this guy. And we moved here 11 years ago yesterday, and so we do a lot of traveling, and we have stayed in a lot of Airbnbs. And we've always dreamed about, oh, that would be so cool to do that. And so we just kind of started exploring that last fall. just researching what the city requires, researching the fire department rules and laws around that. And we have been looking at a lot of houses. And when this one popped up, it was exactly what we were looking for. And we did the due diligence to make sure that it was rentable with the fire department before we pulled the trigger on that one. And that it was a rental before really helped us, make sure that it could be licensed again, because I know that that can be an obstacle. But that's a little bit about why we're here. And
Yeah, and I would say we have very much vested interest in Mount Pleasant. It is home for us now, and so there's no plans of like buying and then heading out or anything like that. We both work at the church where I'm in charge of the college and young adult ministry, so I'm very close communications with CMU and a lot of things there, and it's just understanding the importance of just the healthy growth of Mount Pleasant, knowing that it attracts, some of the college students to come when they see the downtown businesses doing well and everything else. And so we would just want to contribute any way that we can to help the city move in the right direction, and just investing and letting people see the beauties of Mount Pleasant with the view overlooking the park and the river there. And just like Emmanuel has shared too, just close proximity to downtown and being able to utilize the shops down there as well.
do you have any questions?
Any questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Yeah.
I will open up the public comment portion of the hearing if anyone from the public would like to comment. Don't see anyone coming up here in person. Is there anyone online?
There's no one on Zoom nor email.
Thank you. I will close public comment and open up discussion.
Move to approve SUP 2312, subject to the following condition. 1, the applicant shall comply with the requirements of public safety and get approval for a rental license with the Mount Pleasant Fire Department.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. And next item on the agenda is public comment. If someone from the public would like to comment, this is your last chance to do so at this meeting. Seeing no one here in person, is there anyone online that is seeking to make a public comment?
No, there's no one online.
Thank you. I will close public comment, and next item on the agenda is discuss amendments to table 154-405A of the zoning ordinance regarding driveway widths, and consider setting a public hearing on this issue at the September 7th, 2023 regular meeting.
Thank you. So the first case that we have here for a text amendment is a topic that we discussed in our June 1st meeting. So we had discussed to change the driveway widths around busy corridors, so especially Mission Street, but also other portions of roads that are that MDOT has jurisdiction over, so Pickard Road, east of Mission, and High Street, west of Mission. So as you know, the ordinance today requires that driveway widths be up to 24 feet in width. The reason behind it was that 24 feet was seen as the maximum width in which pedestrians feel safe to cross. And the problem with that is that the MDOT has standards that they follow within their engineering principles. And so after looking at the book and having several meetings with MDOT, they stated that a 30-foot width is what they usually require in busy roads, like the ones that I mentioned. With the amount of traffic that we have and the current speed limits, it's just creating 24-foot driveways would create potential rear-end impacts. And so their request was that if we could accommodate the 30-foot. But then there are some cases, and I think this is quite particular to Mount Pleasant. We do allow auto-related uses in our commercial districts pursuant to a special use permit, but we do allow some of those like gas stations or even drive-through establishments that can create a lot of traffic in and out and with quite a high frequency. And so in those situations, depending on the amount of also trucks that may be accessing the site, MDOT could potentially need wider driveways. But in recognition that we have in our goals to make sure that pedestrians and cyclists are well accommodated in our busy corridors, my recommendation is to allow for wider ones if there are pedestrian safety elements that could be incorporated into the design. And MDOT is willing to come to every single pre-application meeting along those corridors and workshop solutions with us and the applicant at the same time, so we are not bouncing applicants back and forth between the city and the state. So I have 2 staff members at the MDOT that will be able to come to those. Therefore, the proposal here, sorry, I will also note that after I spoke with you, I also spoke with the city engineer about this particular item. She was okay with the changes, as I mentioned in the June meeting, but she also felt that Pickard is a very busy road, even west of Mission, so in the area that the city has jurisdiction over. And so she recommended that we make the change along Pickard from west to east, as well as the other portions that I mentioned that MDOT has jurisdiction over. And so that's what the draft language is tackling. And therefore, I would like the Planning Commission to consider setting a public hearing for this text amendment to move forward in the September meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
I have a quick technical question. I missed the last meeting, unfortunately. If somebody is building a 30-foot driveway along M20 or Mission, the state corridors, they have to get permission from the city and the state?
Yes, so they have to comply with the city ordinance, but then in order for them to be able to do any work at the right-of-way, they have to get permission from MDOT. So what ends up happening is that, let's say they come to the pre-app, we give permission for them to do, and we say that they can only do a 24-foot driveway. Then after, if they can get approval from us, and then they would need to get approval from MDOT in order to begin construction and do the curb cut in the right-of-way. And then they may pause that and say, hey, we actually require 30 feet. So we have an inconsistency at this time. And there was an applicant particularly that was going back and forth, and they even left and decided not to pursue developing here. So I felt that, yeah.
Okay,
anyhow.
well, I mean, we can't override the state. And this was before you got here a couple of years ago. I brought this issue up. Why are we trying to write rules different from the state rules when we're just going to get overruled?
Mm-hmm.
And apparently you're saying that somebody passed this town over because we weren't congruent with the state?
Yes, yes. So
Okay, so is the idea here to get congruent with the state so that doesn't happen yet again?
yes,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, no problem.
Any other questions?
I'll just add a little note on the zoning piece, just because I was looking for language that would give us the, that freedom to allow for something that the state is requiring. We only have language that allows that to happen when it's a health-related subject. So we do have language in the ordinance, it's just that it's not for any state rule, it's for Department of Health rules.
Well, I guess I don't understand that, because if it's a state right-of-way on a road that's owned by the state of Michigan, they make the rules. We can't trump over that.
So thank you for the question. I also found that strange, and then I went to their manual, the state manual on design, and there is also a section there that says, even though there are the standards that follow engineer principles, this standard shall not overrule local government rules. So that's, in the end of the day, they do have to follow our rules, but then if they do follow our rules, then it's not going to create a safe environment, if that makes sense.
I understand that, but I mean, that's optional on the part of the state. We could write this in here, and then next month they could say, hey, guess what? We changed our minds. You have to go to a 30-foot cut. Ooh.
I think that's why their standards don't overrule local laws. They just randomly change the standard with no notice to anybody that doesn't have the due process of passing a law.
Well, I mean, there's no due process with the state. It's their road. They can do it with their road what they wish to.
As she stated, their standards don't overrule the local law.
Unless they decide that suddenly it does.
They can't suddenly decide it does.
It's their road. We don't have jurisdiction over the state of Michigan. I mean, we could just, I guess I don't know what we want to do tonight. Do we want to make it the same as the state guidelines? So we don't lose out on further development? Or are we going to do what we did 2 years ago and monkey it up so we do?
As I interpret this for tonight, this is, rather than making a decision, is kicking that down the road till next month, where if, you know, if you make a motion for a public hearing.
have to have a
and then
public
you
hearing,
Get
yeah,
more
sure.
context, and this would be a good time to, they may bring up extra questions for context to, so we can have ideas more fully fleshed out at that time.
Well, I moved that we have that public hearing on September 7th, 2023, regular meeting.
Second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is discuss amendment to table 154-410A, section 154-410, and article 7 of the zoning ordinance regarding instructional uses, transitional housing, adult daycare centers, and detoxification facilities, and consider setting a public hearing on this issue at the September 7th, 2023 regular meeting.
Thank you. So this case is something that we talked about on June 1st and July 6th. So we had 2 work sessions already about institutional uses. And the discussion at first were about these 3 different uses, so transitional housing, adult daycare centers, and detox facilities. And the commission had asked me to bring more information about transitional housing and how other municipalities regulate those. So I did bring that forward with a few case studies, and we had further discussion. And then the commission asked that staff considered requiring shelters to provide services to the homeless, emphasizing social rehabilitation to ensure that facilities are working towards the goal of reducing homelessness and assisting occupants find more permanent living arrangements. And that description would be basically live in the definition of transitional housing. So I did try to incorporate language that would require those services to be provided in our city. The second request from the Planning Commission was that I should clarify the maximum allowed density, and that allowed density has to be solely calculated by computing the area within the building designated for sleeping purposes. So it's very common that shelters like that, you would basically have a whole space with a large kitchen and common spaces. And so we just needed to clarify that whatever area is designated for sleeping purposes is where you calculate density. The third request was to ensure that the new use classification does not negatively impact existing shelters, such as women, children housing, and overnight shelters that are provided by churches in our community. That one, I worked again very closely with building safety, did some research here in town to get some a little bit more context about those existing situations, and therefore decided to provide you with 2 options of text amendments. So maybe I would just jump to that. One option would be to permit smaller transitional housing up to 16 occupants in residential districts as well as commercial districts. And within that, the idea would be to permit them by right, which is what's happening already today. If a small shelter is coming in one of those areas and they are able to comply with our other building designations, so a multifamily or rooming, then it doesn't matter who is living in them, we allow them. So that's the main rationale. And then we would regulate any building with more than 16 occupants as an actual institutional use, which makes sense from a building code perspective. That's how building code separates institutional versus residential. And then for those, we would subject those shelters to a special use permit. So they will have to come to the Planning Commission for approval. And, but the rules within them could be basically the same in terms of the calculations, the density calculations and so forth. So that's one option. The other option would be to not regulate small shelters and just leave everything as is. So again, if they can comply with rooming occupancy requirements, so they're tied to a specific location in town, they have square footage requirements, all of that. If they are able to comply with that, they can be developed by right and continue to do so from now on, or it has been like that. So we're not going to be changing anything. And then for the institutional uses, the proposal is basically the same. So I would like the Planning Commission to have a discussion on those two options and see which one you want to go with. I'll just note that option one will allow the city to potentially, the existing shelters, small shelters, to potentially become compliant with the rules. An example is a rooming, dwelling, housing women, children that are outside of the areas where we allow rooming. So in that case, if they comply with the density calculation, they would be able to become compliant. The problem with that one that I see is that we're gonna just be calling small shelters something different than any other housing. So we're in a way gonna make a distinction between the occupants. But it is a pathway forward and it has its benefits. The other option, we're just gonna be blind to the residential type of shelters, and we're gonna be just regulating the institutional shelters, which are more dense and bigger facilities. So hopefully that helps, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Or if someone would like to make a motion, whichever. Or discussion.
Well, I'll move that we have a public hearing on this issue at the September 7th, 2023 regular meeting. That is this public hearing over the amendment to table 154.410.A.
Second.
Now, do we need to specify which option now? Okay.
Oh, right.
What's that?
Yes,
We
yeah.
need to specify which option of the proposed text amendment we want to have a
People,
public hearing for.
people can't have input on both, but we would have to have two public hearings if that was the case?
Yes, if you wanted both to come forward, we would probably need to have two public hearings. And then one would have to be declined and the other one would have to be, we need a motion for it to be approved if we postpone the decision.
Okay. I withdraw my first motion. It says here, a public hearing on this issue, but apparently I just withdraw my motion.
Would option one allow for more housing, more transitional housing than what option two does?
That's a good question. I guess if we signal the use in the ordinance, it's more predictable and obvious. So if anyone is wanting to open a small shelter, they will be able to easily locate that in the ordinance and see where it's allowed and if it's permitted by right or if they need to get any special approvals. So in a way, it could be, the transparency could help achieve more housing. But at the same time, I worry about the fact that they would then be really recorded in our databases. So a lot of those times when we have the small shelters, we have folks that are fleeing domestic violence and issues like that. So there's something good about not having them, disclosed, if that makes sense. It's a very complex situation, and
So is option 2 less restrictive than option 1?
I think that option 2 is more restrictive in terms of where they can be allowed. And maybe if I can just explain that a little bit. So from the addresses that I could find, I would say that either they are not classified as any building typology or they're classified as rooming dwelling. And our city has decided to be very restrictive with rooming dwelling because we see rooming dwelling as being housing for students. And it's not as simple as that. Our community has utilized rooming dwellings for other types of populations, like populations that are fleeing situations like this. So because of that restriction in rooming, I think option 2 is more flexible and option 1 is more flexible in terms of where small shelters would be able to locate, as opposed to option 2 and keeping them out of the ordinance.
Maybe it would help to have some discussion on everyone's preference on option 1 versus option 2.
Big decision to make with only 5 of us here. Should we look into having a full quorum?
I mean, we could postpone till we have, if someone could do a motion to postpone to the next hearing, if the preference is to have more planning commissioners here to discuss it.
As for me, one of the things I don't know in looking over this is I don't have a good sense of the amount of demand. I know there's demand for it, but I'm just trying to think if one option is more restricted than the other, well, do both options meet, a bar that we're trying to predict what you don't know what demand will be in the future for any, particular kind of land use. Is that you wouldn't want anything to be too restrictive? I guess I would like to hear a bit more about what that demand might currently be. Yeah, even just informally. Do you have any insight on that, Manuela?
I can reach out to a couple of organizations that we work with and try to find that out. Listening Ear, as well as Restoration House, obviously, and the Housing Commission, just because they handle low-income affordable housing requests. So I can reach out to those organizations and see if we can get a number for you.
I guess, can you define what transitional housing is versus the homeless shelter? I guess I don't understand the difference. Is this permanent? I guess that's where my question is from. You're looking for transition as a temporary thing that they're staying for a little bit, then they leave, or more of a shelter situation?
So, yeah, that's a good question. So in looking at precedents, there are cities that separate uses by a time component. So temporary as up to 2 years, and then more than 2 years is other types of housing. And I just felt that doing something like that would be, one, very hard to enforce, and two, I don't know why that would matter too much. So the types of uses that we're talking about are more transient in nature. So it's either housing for, the big institutional one that I have, which is the same in option 1 and option 2, regulate the big homeless shelters with more than 16 occupants pursuant to an SUP with a density restriction. That type would be more of the very transient situation, in each day you can have different occupants coming in and out. The smaller shelters, though, I think they usually have been functioning as a little bit more permanent, but also it's not like you're, renting a house for 5 years, 10 years, but those folks may be fleeing a situation for a couple of years until they can get on their feet and find permanent housing. So both are transitional in nature, but the time is a little bit different from what I understand.
Would anyone like to make a motion of some type?
Still thinking. Just going back to the question on demand, when I see the paragraph on this memorandum above where there's the two options presented, full paragraph about mentioning 16 or fewer occupants, I guess I'm trying to think of where that is tied to demand and how there might be unintended consequences of one versus another. I mean, I'm just not familiar with the role of shelters in the community or potential ones that might be for, hey, this could be for up to 10 for, I mean, more of a niche area of helping people out.
So, yeah, I honestly don't know how many occupants the shelters that churches currently have in the community, how many occupants that they receive. I don't have that sense of scale. Maybe some of you may have, but I can try to find out. The restoration houses, we've been working with them, and Dee is here present today. They've been thinking about potentially offering 50 beds into the facility once they are able to relocate.
5-0?
5-0. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the one use that would be coming forward. As you know, I mentioned this in the June meeting, but they only offer daily, it's a day shelter. They would like to provide overnight accommodations, first to just during the cold months, but then year round as they are able to secure more funding. And for the small ones, again, the scale is small. It's roughly 12 occupants that I was able to learn. I was able to find 5 addresses, and women's shelter, men's shelter, and they're all small. And just looks like a house, and you just have more people in them. And then that's why I did the research on how the building code regulates uses like this. And 16 occupants comes from a data on the United States that 98% of households that are single-family households would have less than 16 occupants. So 16 has been used as a threshold in building code for separating residential and institutional. And when I did the calculations with like a average house, single-family house square footage with a minimum bedroom square footage in the code, 16 is the perfect number, basically, for all the averages. So, yeah, so I think that would match well the rules that we have.
These are 16 non-related, not 16 non-related, these families, or who are these 16?
16 maximum in the small ones.
Are they related people? I mean, is it mom, dad, kids, or is it 16 individuals just know each other?
In this case, with the way we are proposing the option one, it can be unrelated, but in the situations that we researched, I mean, there's no way to know. I don't have that answer to you. The one thing I can say is that children are not counted in any occupancy requirements. So building code doesn't include children in any of the calculations in building code. So when our building safety department is determining the classification in building code, it's solely based on the amount of adults. So like a rule that a single-family dwelling can only have up to 2 unrelated adults. It's just the adults, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't know if that helps. But I don't know if the existing shelters that are small, if the 12 occupants are all unrelated, or if there are some of them that are related.
With option 1, where it says staff note this option may allow existing small shelters, it could be non-conforming with ordinance. Is that, I did interpret that as the same as will allow, or is it that they basically
Good question.
expect that this will happen, or is it just like that's a potential
It's a
situation?
potential, just because in order for them to be able to become conforming, we would need to, one, they would need to apply for the certificate of occupancy with us, with the building safety department. And then the building safety department looks at the zoning ordinance for compliance, and the density calculation that I had suggested in the past would apply. So if they can meet that, then they will be able to become compliant. But one, they have to apply, and then second, they have to comply with the rule.
Looks to me like option 2 is less challenging for locations with less than 16 residents. But I thought I heard you say that option 2 is more challenging for.
Good question.
Can you
So
go back to that?
yeah, let's go back to that. So there is a question about process and a question about amount of space in the city where these uses can go. So applicability. So applicability is, when I look at applicability, option 2 would be more restrictive, because they would need to be able to comply with a rooming dwelling
Oh, I see.
requirement, or a single family, So single family, it's only up to 2 unrelated adults.
So the option 1 expands essentially the,
Applicability, yes.
the areas where the less than 16 occupants. Yep, okay, thank you.
Yes, no problem.
Any other questions, or is anyone ready to make a motion?
I'm comfortable myself with option 1. And if anybody can make a case for option 2, I'm open to hearing that.
If you'd like to make a motion, we can further discuss that.
Motion to set a public hearing subject to the following conditions. No, motion to set a public hearing to consider the option 1 text change, zoning text amendment, and the amendment as well, number 2, for the September 7th regular meeting.
I understand what you said. It's basically,
It's one or
is
the
it one
other.
motion to discuss both of them on September 7th?
No,
Okay, all right, that's,
I mean, point 2, the allow medical
Oh,
uses within the.
okay, all right.
Sorry,
okay. I heard option 1, then option 2, so then I.
sorry.
And just to note, there is a number 3 as well, adult daycare centers by right in residential
yes.
commercial districts.
Sorry. I've never been good at making motions. It's a skill.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion about this motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? We need 5 votes to, all of us have to vote in favor. Okay,
Consensus, I guess?
I guess let's do a roll call vote. I didn't hear everyone vote.
A roll call, okay. Nicholas? Do I have to go in the, sorry.
I'd like to wait and have the rest of the people vote on that, 'cause isn't that kind of, it's kind of a big deal, isn't it?
You can always abstain during the roll call vote.
Is it what, again, I guess having us can decide this.
If you vote no on this, the motion doesn't pass, so.
I guess part of me wonders again what the other other three might have a choice in this, or doesn't. I mean, can they have a discussion at the? I guess I hate to have us pass something in if they're not here.
We're just passing we're passing a motion to set a public hearing, so there will be discussion. The
So
public
they can talk at the public hearing.
yes,
Three. Okay, that's fine.
And recommend amendments.
yes.
All right. Kingsworthy,
Aye.
Leash,
Aye.
Irwin,
Aye.
and, my gosh, Honig.
Aye.
All right, so motion passes.
Okay, next item on the agenda is discuss amendment to table 154-405A of the zoning ordinance regarding the required ratio of house versus garages and consider setting a public hearing on the issue at the September 7th, 2023 regular meeting.
All right, so this is our last text amendment for tonight. On July 6th, we had discussed the ratio of house versus garage regulation in residential districts and CD4. So basically, the ratio rule that we have is to be able to get a facade that is not just about a garage, but it's a house. So it's a really an aesthetics control here that it makes sense from a design perspective, but the consequence of the ratio of house versus garage having to be at least 50-50 is that it could prevent and has been preventing development of housing with garages that can accommodate 2 cars. The request from the Planning Commission in our last work session was for staff to take a look at data and look at the lot widths that we have in those districts, as well as the vacancy rates on those lots. So the question was, how many of those lots are too narrow to accommodate 2-car garages with the rule as it exists? So when staff look at the data, the percentage is not really relevant. I mean, it's somewhat relevant, but it's not huge. Overall, in all the districts, CD3L, CD3, and CD4, we have 13.5% of lots that are narrow, that therefore wouldn't be able to be redeveloped with 2-car garages. Only 0.5% of those lots are both too narrow and vacant. So that 0.5 is really, it's a small percentage, but I wouldn't discard the idea of redevelopment on lots that are already built, especially considering the old age of single-family, especially houses that we have here in town. When looking at each district, the percentage called my attention a little bit more. So we have almost a fourth of CD3 district lots not being able to be redeveloped with 2-car garages. So when you look at, a fourth of all lots in CD3 wouldn't be able to have 2-car garages, and you compare that percentage with data that says that, let's see, I have it here. 92%, almost 93% of households in Michigan own 2 cars, then I find it problematic. And then doing design analysis, I did create some drawings to try to illustrate what a minor change could do to this. So if we were to change the ratio from 50-50 for single-story houses to 60-40, we already we would be able to accommodate at least the minimum lot width requirement. So in CD3, it's 50 feet. So 50-foot lots would be able to accommodate 2-car garages. And I think would still look nice, as you can see in the diagram in the bottom of the page here. So the text amendment does propose to change the ratio from 50 to 60. And then also provide an exemption for two-story buildings, which we discussed in the last meeting. And there was consensus that that exception wouldn't hurt the community in terms of the aesthetics of our residential areas. Do you have any questions?
If there's no questions, if anyone would like to make a motion.
Well, okay, I'll make a motion that we, is this a door number 1 or door number 2 kind of thing again, or can we just have a hearing?
I believe it's just one proposed
I see
draft.
2 doors, but
Just
I
one.
don't think that's.
I'll make a motion that, let's see. That we set a public hearing September 7th, 2023 regular meeting to amend the ordinance, let's see, 154.405.a, District Standards, CD3L.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Can I just ask if it's just CD3L or all districts as proposed?
Everything in bold print there. Do you need me to read it all out?
I don't think so. I think this is clear. So it's CD3L, CD3, and CD4.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is staff report.
We had two site plans that were approved administratively since we last spoke. The first one is SPR 23-10 for 1005 Corporate Drive. The proposal was for the renovation of the existing building to an auto body paint and repair shop and new vehicle storage area and associated screening. The second, maybe questions on that one? The second one is SPR 23-16 for 1302 North Harris. This is a proposal for a 30 by 78 foot building addition at Coin and a 20 by 30 foot concrete pad to accommodate a service bay expansion in the Coin property. And those were both approved by staff. Any questions?
Does anyone have any questions? Thank you. Is that all for the staff report?
That's all.
If anyone would like to move to adjourn,
I'll move that we adjourn.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Meeting adjourned.